The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of our house on Maple Street, casting long shadows across the scratched linoleum floor where I sat with my bowl of cereal. The silence at our breakfast table had become as familiar as the chipped coffee mug my father gripped with white knuckles, staring at the stack of bills beside his plate. Richard Cole, my father, was 53 years old and looked like a man who'd been fighting a losing battle for decades. His Salt-and-Pepper hair needed cutting, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd watched too many dreams crumble. This morning, those eyes held something different, a dangerous combination of desperation and resignation that made my stomach clench. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jackson, he said without looking up from the bills, we need to talk. My mother, Lorraine, stood at the sink with her back to us, washing the same plate for the third time. Her shoulders were rigid with the kind of tension that had become permanent fixtures in our house over the past year. At 49, she maintained the careful appearance of a woman who refused to let circumstances show on her face, but I could see the stress in the way her hands trembled slightly as she scrubbed. About what? I asked, though something cold was already settling in my chest. Dad finally looked at me, and I saw the decision had already been made. Whatever conversation we were about to have was just a formality. Your mother and I have been talking about your situation, he began, his voice taking on the tone he'd delivered when delivering bad news about his failed businesses. You're 21 now, a man, and it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. The cereal turned to cardboard in my mouth. My situation? You can't live here forever, son, Mom said, still facing the sink. Her shoulders were rigid, but her voice was steady, controlled, but I could catch the slight tremor that betrayed her true feelings. It's not healthy for a young man your age to depend on his parents. I stared at them, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. For the past 6 months, I'd been working full-time at Lincoln Memory Care, a private nursing home across town. I gave them $300 every month for rent and groceries, kept my head down, and stayed out of their increasingly frequent arguments about money. I pay rent, I said quietly. I help with expenses. I don't cause problems. Dad's jaw tightened. This isn't about problems, Jackson. It's about responsibility, about becoming the man you need to be instead of hiding behind your parents when life gets tough. The accusation hit like a slap. Hiding? I work 40 hours a week. I contribute to this household more than what? Dad's voice rose, years of frustration finally breaking through. More than the man who's kept a roof over your head for 21 years? More than the woman who's fed and clothed you since you were born? Richard, please, Mom murmured, but she didn't turn around. No, Lorraine, he needs to hear this. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We've been too easy on you, son, too willing to let you take the comfortable path instead of pushing you to grow. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 12 years, at the refrigerator covered with my old school achievements, at the window where I'd watched seasons change while doing homework at this same table. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. What are you saying exactly? I asked, though I already knew. We're saying it's time for you to find your own place, Mom said, finally turning around. Her face was composed, but her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. Sunday, 3 days away. This is about money, isn't it? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You need me gone so you can figure out how to pay the mortgage. Dad's face flushed red. Don't you dare lecture us about money, boy. You have no idea what it's like to provide for a family, to make the hard choices that keep this household running. Hard choices like kicking out your son? Hard choices like teaching that son to be independent instead of enabling him to be a burden. The word burden hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I felt something inside me break, not dramatically, but with the quiet snap of a bone under too much pressure. "Fine," I said, standing up slowly. "If that's what you want." Mom's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something that might have been regret flicker across her face. But then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "It's for your own good, Jackson. Someday you'll understand." I nodded once and walked toward the stairs, my legs feeling unsteady. Behind me, I heard them talking in low voices, already planning how they'd use my bedroom, discussing Dad's latest business idea with the kind of optimism that had led to every previous failure. In my room, I pulled out the old duffel bag I'd used for summer camps as a kid. 21 years of life and everything that mattered fit into one bag. Clothes, a few books, my high school diploma, and the $47 I'd kept hidden in my sock drawer for emergencies. I guess this qualified as an emergency. As I packed, I could hear my parents moving around downstairs, their voices lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They were already planning their future without me, discussing how Dad's food delivery startup would finally have the space to succeed without the burden of supporting their adult son. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being evicted from my childhood home to make room for another one of Dad's guaranteed-to-fail business ventures. When I came back downstairs with my bag, they were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the morning paper, looking like any normal family on any normal Tuesday. "There's $40 on the counter," Mom said, without looking up. "For bus fare or whatever you need." $40. The price of 21 years of being their son. I took the money because I needed it, shouldered my bag, and walked to the front door. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the rustle of newspaper pages. "Jackson!" I turned back, hoping, despite everything, that one of them was about to change their mind. "Don't come back until you've learned to take care of yourself," Dad said, his eyes already back on the sports section. I opened the door and stepped into the crisp October morning. The street was quiet, morning fog still clinging to the trees, and the world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, when I had a family and a home. At the end of our driveway, I turned back once to look at the house. It was a modest 2-story colonial, nothing special to anyone driving by, but it had been home for 12 years, the only place I'd ever really belonged. Now it was just a building where people lived who didn't want me anymore. I walked toward downtown Lincoln, toward a future I couldn't imagine, carrying everything I owned, and wondering if survival was something you could learn or something you were born with. Behind me, the house stood silent and still, keeping its secrets. I didn't know then that I would see it again. I didn't know that when I did, everything would be different. The first night, I slept in my Honda Civic behind a 24-hour Walmart, figuring security wouldn't bother someone who looked like they were just resting between shifts. I was wrong. The flashlight beam cut through my window at 2 a.m., accompanied by the polite but firm voice of a guard who'd clearly done this before. "Can't sleep here, son. Store policy." I drove to a residential street and parked under a broken streetlight, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me jump. Footsteps, cats fighting, distant traffic. My stomach cramped with hunger, and the $40 felt both precious and pathetically small. By morning, exhaustion and desperation drove me to call Derek, a friend from high school. "Dude, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I explained my situation, trying to make it sound temporary rather than the complete abandonment it actually was.
That's harsh, man. Yeah, you can crash on our couch for a couple days, but you'll have to talk to my mom. Mrs. Patterson was kind, making me a sandwich and asking gentle questions. She let me stay 3 nights, but I could see the strain. Derek's sister complained about me being in the living room, and his father made pointed comments about young people needing to figure things out. On the third night, Mrs. Patterson sat me down after dinner, guilt heavy in her voice. Jackson, you're a good boy, but we can't do this indefinitely. Tom's worried about setting a precedent, and honestly, we're barely making ends meet ourselves. I nodded, thanked her, and packed my bag again. The next few weeks blurred into a cycle of worn-out welcomes and car seat sleeping. Friends' couches became temporary refuges until I inevitably wore out my welcome. My savings dwindled on gas, dollar menu meals, and truck stop showers. Then came the breaking point. A rainy Thursday night in November, parked behind a closed restaurant with my last $2 spent on gas. I hadn't eaten in 36 hours, and the cold seeped through my car's thin walls like judgment. That's when I saw the light from Maya's Diner. Maya's Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main, like a beacon of warmth in the November rain. Through steamed windows, I could see yellow light and people eating comfort food while I sat in my car, dizzy with hunger and too proud to beg. But pride doesn't keep you warm. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I pushed through the glass door, bell chiming overhead, and slumped into the first empty booth. The waitress who approached was a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back practically, and eyes that recognized desperation when they saw it. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. I opened my mouth to explain I couldn't pay, but what came out was, "Please?" She poured the coffee and studied me. "When's the last time you ate, honey?" The kindness in her voice almost broke me. "Tuesday?" I whispered. Without another word, she walked away and returned with a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. "I can't pay for this," I said, voice cracking. "Did I ask you to?" She slid into the booth across from me. "I'm Maya. This is my place, and you look like you need a meal more than I need $4.50. I ate slowly, trying not to cry from relief. Maya sat with me, occasionally refilling my coffee, not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. When I finished, she looked me over with the practical assessment of someone used to making quick decisions about people. "Got a place to sleep tonight?" I shook my head. "Thought so. There's a cot in the storage room out back. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. You can use it tonight, but tomorrow we talk." The storage room was cluttered with boxes of supplies, but the cot was real and the blanket clean. For the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without jumping at every sound. The next morning, Maya woke me with coffee and a direct look that meant business time was over. "Here's the deal, kid. You can keep sleeping here, and I'll feed you, but you're going to work for it. Dishwashing, cleaning, whatever needs doing. The pay isn't much, but it's honest, and it's a start." I nodded so hard I thought my neck might snap. "But I've got rules," she continued. "No drinking, no drugs, no drama. Show up on time, work hard, and treat my customers with respect. You screw up once, you're gone. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She smiled for the first time since I had met her. "Good. You start now. There's an apron in the kitchen and about 6 hours worth of dishes waiting for you." As I walked toward the kitchen, she called after me. "And kid, what's your name?" "Jackson. Jackson Cole."
Well, Jackson Cole, Maya said, welcome to the rest of your life. The dishwasher was older than I was and had the temperament of a cranky old man. It would work perfectly for 3 hours, then suddenly decide to flood the kitchen floor with sudsy water that smelled like industrial regret. You've got to sweet-talk her, Maya explained on my second day, patting the machine like a beloved pet. She's been here since 1987, and she doesn't appreciate being rushed. I learned to sweet-talk a lot of things at the diner. The ancient coffee machine that needed exactly 37 seconds between pours. The walk-in freezer that would lock you inside if you didn't prop the door open just right. The cash register that required you to hit the numbers twice firmly like you meant it. But mostly, I learned to sweet-talk myself into getting up every morning. Those first weeks were brutal. My body wasn't used to standing for 10 hours straight, and my hands were constantly raw from dishwater and cleaning chemicals. I fell into bed each night feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, only to wake up 5 hours later and do it all again. Maya worked me hard, but she worked alongside me. She was always first to arrive and last to leave, moving through the diner with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to waste neither time nor motion. 23 minutes to prep vegetables for lunch service, she'd call out. That includes dicing onions, chopping peppers, and slicing tomatoes. Think you could beat yesterday's time? Everything was a challenge, a small competition designed to make me better. Wash dishes faster, stack plates neater, keep the coffee fresh without wasting beans. Learn the menu well enough to help customers when she was busy. After my first week, she sat me down during the slow period between breakfast and lunch rush. "You're not fast enough yet," she said without preamble. "But you show up, you don't complain, and you're learning. That's more than I can say for the last 3 people I hired." She pulled out a manila envelope and counted out $67 in wrinkled bills. "Your first week's pay. It's not much, but it's yours." I stared at the money like it was a miracle. It was the first honest wage I'd earned since being thrown out, the first money that was mine without apology or condition. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Maya said. "Thank me when you've saved enough to get your own place." The coffee always got cold in Mrs. Henderson's cup. Every Tuesday and Friday at 2:30 p.m., she'd order a large black coffee and a slice of apple pie, sit in the corner booth by the window, and spend the next hour making phone calls while her coffee went untouched. I'd learned the routines of Maya's regulars over the past 6 months. But Mrs. Henderson was different. Her phone calls weren't about construction schedules or book club meetings. They were about houses. "The bank's foreclosing on the Mitchell property next week," I heard her tell someone on a particularly slow Friday afternoon. "It's going for $60,000 less than what they paid for it 3 years ago. Complete nightmare for them, but could be a gold mine for someone with cash." I was wiping down the counter, trying not to eavesdrop, but her words caught my attention. Foreclosure was a concept I knew too well. The threat that had hung over our house for months before my parents kicked me out. Mrs. Henderson ended her call and waved me over. "Could I get a warm-up on this coffee? And maybe you could tell Maya that I've got some information about that property she was asking about?" As I poured fresh coffee, she studied me with sharp eyes used to evaluating people quickly. "You're Jackson, right? Maya's protégé?" She had a slight smile that suggested she knew more about my situation than I was comfortable with. "Just Jackson," I said. "I work here." "Maya tells me you're smart, that you pick things up fast." She pulled out a business card and set it on the table. "I'm Rebecca Henderson. I'm a real estate agent, and I come here because Maya makes the best coffee in town and minds her own business." I glanced at the card. Henderson Realty, with a photo of Mrs. Henderson in a navy blazer, smiling the confident smile of someone who closed deals for a living. "Real estate," I said, not sure what else to offer. "The family business that never sleeps," she said with a laugh. "Every day people are buying houses, selling houses, losing houses. The market keeps moving whether folks are ready or not." She leaned back in the booth, her coffee finally at drinking temperature. "Maya mentioned you're a quick learner, good with numbers. Ever think about what you want to do long term? can't wash dishes forever, can you? The question caught me off guard. For the past 6 months, I had been so focused on surviving day to day that I hadn't allowed myself to think about the future beyond next week's rent. I don't know, I admitted. I'm still figuring things out. Real estate school met every Tuesday and Thursday evening in a fluorescent-lit classroom that smelled like coffee and ambition. After 18 months of working at Maya's Diner, I'd saved enough to pay for the course and keep myself afloat during the 3 months of study. Mrs. Henderson had been right about real estate being a business where you could start with almost nothing. But she'd also been honest about the challenges: long hours, rejection, the feast or famine nature of commission work. Real estate, our instructor Mr. Patel told us on the first night, is not about houses. It's about dreams. Every buyer has a vision of their future. Every seller is closing a chapter of their past. I studied during slow periods at the diner, highlighting passages about property law and market analysis while the coffee pot burbled in the background. Maya was endlessly patient with my questions, and Mrs. Henderson became an unofficial tutor, explaining the practical applications of what I was learning in class. After passing my licensing exam on the second attempt, Mrs. Henderson hired me as a junior agent. My first few months were a series of small failures and smaller victories. Showings that led to nowhere, deals that fell through during inspection, buyers who couldn't qualify for financing despite their confidence. But I was learning, and more importantly, I was building something. Then Mrs. Henderson called me on a Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee go cold. "There's a foreclosure auction next week," she said. "Might be something you'd want to look at." She gave me the address, and my hands started shaking. 1247 Maple Street. My parents' house, the home they'd kicked me out of 3 years ago, where I'd lived for 12 years before learning that family was conditional. "Jackson, you still there?" I managed to find my voice. Yeah, I'm here. "The opening bid starts at $89,000. It needs work, but the bones are good. Sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected places." She had no idea how right she was. The next morning, I drove by the house for the first time since that October morning when I'd walked away with everything I owned in a duffel bag. It looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The oak tree in the front yard had grown taller, and the paint on the front door was peeling. A foreclosure notice was posted prominently in the front window, official and final. No sign of my parents. I wondered where they were living now, what story they were telling themselves about how they'd ended up here. But for the first time in 3 years, I had choices. I had money saved, credit established, and the skills to turn a distressed property into something valuable. I could walk away, let someone else buy my childhood home. Or I could take it back. The foreclosure auction was held on the courthouse steps on a gray Wednesday morning in November. I sat in my car across the street, watching the small crowd gather. Investors with clipboards, a few real estate agents, and several people who looked like they were there for the same reason I was, to watch their past get sold to the highest bidder.
1247 Maple Street was the third property on the list. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice that carried across the courthouse plaza. "Next property, 1247 Maple Street. 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom colonial. Assessed value, $127,000. Opening bid starts at $89,000. Several hands went up immediately. I recognized one of the bidders, a local investor who bought distressed properties, fixed them up cheaply, and rented them to families who couldn't qualify for mortgages. $90,000, the auctioneer called. $92,000. Do I hear $95,000? The bidding moved quickly. At $105,000, only 2 bidders remained, the investor and a young couple who looked nervous and out of place.
$107,000, the investor called out, his voice bored and confident. The young couple exchanged glances. The woman shook her head almost imperceptibly, and the man's shoulders sagged with disappointment. $107,000 going once, the auctioneer announced. My hand went up. $110,000, I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Every head in the crowd turned to look at me. The investor's eyes narrowed with annoyance. $110,000, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I hear $112,000? The investor studied me for a moment, probably trying to figure out if I was serious. Finally, he nodded. $112,000. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I had exactly $24,000 in savings and access to financing Mrs. Henderson had helped me arrange. It would be tight, but it was possible. I raised my hand anyway. $115,000. The investor's jaw tightened. This was getting expensive for a rental property. $117,000, he countered. I thought about my parents, about the night they'd ordered me to pack my things and leave, about sleeping in my car and wondering if I'd survive the winter. $120,000, I said. A murmur went through the crowd. The investor hesitated, calculator in hand, running numbers. Finally, he shook his head and stepped back. $120,000 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice? I felt dizzy. I just committed to buying the house where I'd grown up, the place that had rejected me. Sold to bidder number 47 for $120,000. The house was mine. 3 months later, I was replacing outlet covers in the kitchen when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I saw them getting out of an old sedan I didn't recognize. My father looking thinner than I remembered, my mother clutching a manila folder like it contained something precious. They were coming to the front door. I stood frozen in the kitchen, watching them approach. My father moved with less confidence than I remembered, his shoulders slightly stooped. My mother looked older, more fragile, though she still carried herself with that careful composure I knew so well. The doorbell rang. I could have hidden, could have let them think no one was home and waited for them to leave. Instead, I walked to the front door and opened it. The shock on their faces was immediate and complete. Jackson? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Mom. Dad. They stood on the porch, their former porch, staring at me like I was a ghost. My father's mouth opened and closed without sound. My mother clutched her folder tighter. What are you doing here? Dad finally managed. I own the house, I said simply. The color drained from his face. You what? I bought it at the foreclosure auction 3 months ago. My mother found her voice. That's impossible. You didn't... Money? I finished for her. No, I didn't. But I do now. They exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that comes from years of marriage and shared crisis. Can we come in? Mom asked, her politeness intact despite the circumstances. There are some things we need to discuss. I stepped aside and let them enter their former home.
They moved through the living room like tourists in a museum, taking in the fresh paint and new flooring with expressions I couldn't quite read. My father touched the wall where his favorite chair used to sit. My mother looked toward the kitchen, as if expecting to see her coffee maker still sitting on the counter. It looks good, she said quietly. Better than it did when we lived here. We stood in an awkward triangle in the center of the living room, 3 people who shared history but had become strangers to each other. We didn't know, Dad said finally. About you buying the house. The bank wouldn't tell us who purchased it. I'm sure they didn't. We came because, he gestured toward the folder in Mom's hands. We've been staying with my sister in Omaha, but it's temporary. We were hoping to rent the house back, maybe work out some kind of arrangement with the new owner. The new owner. They still hadn't fully grasped that their son, the son they'd thrown out for being a burden, was now their landlord. What kind of arrangement? I asked. Something affordable, Dad said quickly. We could do maintenance, keep up the yard. We know the house, know what it needs. There was desperation in his voice that I'd never heard before. The proud, angry man who'd ordered me to pack my bags and leave had been replaced by someone humbled by circumstances beyond his control. Where are you working now? I asked. I'm between opportunities, Dad said, which I suspected meant he was unemployed. But I've got some good prospects lined up. Mom shot him a look that suggested his prospects weren't as good as he claimed. And you, Mom? Part-time at a dental office in Omaha, but the commute is difficult, and my sister's patience is wearing thin. They needed this house as much as they'd ever needed anything. The irony was overwhelming. They kicked me out to solve their financial problems, and now their financial problems had led them back to beg for shelter from the son they discarded. Mom opened the folder and pulled out documents, bank statements, employment records, character references. She spread them on the counter like evidence in a trial. We've been working with a credit counselor, she said, her voice taking on the earnest tone she'd once used with bill collectors, getting our finances in order. I looked at these two people, who had shaped my childhood and then abandoned me when I needed them most. They looked older than their years, worn down by failure and consequence. Can I ask you something? I said. They both nodded. Why didn't you fight the foreclosure? File for bankruptcy, request a loan modification. My parents exchanged that look married couples develop after years of shared disappointments. Pride, mostly, Dad said quietly. I kept thinking I could turn things around. By the time I admitted we needed help, it was too late. Your father risked the house on another business venture, a catering company that lasted 8 weeks. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They'd lost the family home chasing another of Dad's guaranteed-to-fail dreams, just like I suspected. And that's when you decided I was the problem? The silence that followed was deafening. We were scared, Mom said finally. Desperate. We thought if we had one less mouth to feed, maybe we could save the house. So you threw me out. We thought you'd be fine, Dad said, his voice barely audible. You were young, smart, capable. I could have said yes. Could have let them move back in, accepted their promises to do better, given them the second chance they never gave me. Instead, I looked around the house I'd renovated with my own hands, the place I'd reclaimed through my own effort. I'm sorry, I said. But no. My mother's face crumpled at my refusal. My father's shoulders sagged with defeat, but something in his expression told me he'd expected this answer.
But I'm not doing it to punish you, I continued. I'm doing it because I think it would be bad for all of us. Jackson, please, Mom started. Let me finish, I said, holding up my hand. Moving back into this house won't solve your problems. It will just let you avoid dealing with them. You need to figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else rescuing you. I pulled out an envelope I'd prepared that morning. This is $3,000. It's enough for first month's rent and security deposit on an apartment in Omaha, plus some moving expenses. Consider it a loan, payable when you're back on your feet. My mother took the envelope with trembling hands. But the house, she whispered. The house will be sold to a family who needs it. A family who will fill it with new memories instead of trying to recreate old ones. We stood in silence for a moment. 3 people connected by blood, but separated by choices and consequences. I do forgive you. for kicking me out, for not calling, for everything. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending things can go back to the way they were. My father nodded slowly. "You're probably right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We probably haven't changed as much as we thought we had. You can still change, but you have to want to change for yourselves, not because someone else is forcing you to." They left without arguing, walking to their car with careful steps. My mother turned back once at the car door, as if she wanted to say something else, but then got in and they drove away. 6 weeks later, the house sold to a young family with twin toddlers. They looked at the renovated rooms with wonder, talking about gardens and play sets and Christmas mornings. That evening, I sat in Maya's diner, watching her serve coffee and comfort to anyone who needed it. Mrs. Henderson stopped by with papers for my broker's license application. We talked about opening Henderson and Cole Realty, about specializing in helping first-time buyers. "To new beginnings," Maya said, raising her coffee cup. "To chosen family," I replied. The boy who'd been thrown out with nothing but a duffel bag was gone. In his place was a man who understood that home wasn't a building you owned. It was the people who chose to stay when staying was hard, who helped you up when you fell down, who believed in your future even when you couldn't see it yourself. I'd bought back my childhood house, but I'd found something more valuable in the process. I'd found my way home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.